Hello and welcome back to another Monster Monday, a series where I draw a creature from D&D and I talk about its lore, its history, and what it's like to fight. Today's request comes in from csimpson 14 on YouTube, and they would like to see Rakshasas. But what are Rakshasas? Well, in D&D they are fiends, at least in 5e. In other editions they've also been called outsiders, which basically circles around the same sort of point, meaning an interdimensional or spirit or demonic being. A Rakshasa's true form is said to resemble a tiger-human hybrid, with its palms being swapped to the back of its hand. It's got backwards hands. However, it's said that no one will ever see the true form of a Rakshasa. They're shapeshifters. They like to take the form of powerful people like nobles, rich merchants, or rulers. And this is manifested in-game by their ability to cast Disguise Self. However, Disguise Self only lasts for 1 hour, and they can only cast it 3 times per day. So technically, mechanically, you'd only need to wait for about 4 hours to see what a Rakshasa's true form is. Based on its enormous challenge rating of 13 alone, though, I'd probably give it a more regular self-polymorphing ability, a bit like a doppelganger maybe. It's just personally, just to kind of fit the mythology, to fit the lore a little bit better. But I don't want to talk about doppelgangers here. Somebody else has already requested that, actually. So they will have their time in the spotlight soon enough. But where did they come from? Where did Rakshasas come from? We're told that in D&D they were born of the 9 hells, which is a fantastic exclamation, by the way. By the 9 hells! Or where in the 9 hells did you find that? If you're building a world, pro tip, make sure to have a numerical exclamation somewhere in your campaign. By the 9 divines, for example, is a fantastic one. But I digress. They were born of a dark ritual where demons, who were locked in the 9 hells, sought to free their spirits from their bodies in order to escape the lower planes and prey on humanoids of the material plane. They're obsessed with mortals. In the real world, however, Rakshasas first appeared as creatures in the 1976 AD&D supplement Gods, Demigods, and Heroes that introduced masses of mythological creatures, gods and legends from Egyptian and Hindu and Greek and Celtic and Norse and basically all the mythologies that come to mind when you think of mythology. Rakshasa is originally a Hindu demigod type creature, but has also apparently appeared in Buddhism. And in both of these, the term Asura and Rakshasa are used fairly interchangeably. In Hindu mythology, Rakshasas are not demons as such, but operate pretty similarly to the idea of vampires. They're apparently created from the breath of Brahma, the creator, while he slept, maybe a nightmare in this case. And the moment that they came into being, they craved flesh and blood. I mean, they didn't look like cats, but they did often have like animal-like parts on their bodies, otherwise they were fairly human-like. But they did growl and roar like animals. They had 2 huge fangs and sharp claws. They were often depicted with flaming eyes and flaming hair, and would drink blood from their palms or from a human skull. And this kind of flies in the face of the D&D representation, who are said to disdain physical combat, deeming it pretty uncivilized, preferring instead to use magic. They're all about sort of excess. They're all about wealth. They're not about getting their hands dirty, unlike the Hindu version. That said, in Hindu legends, it seems to indicate that they can fly and vanish and have access to something called Maya. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, which is basic magical power of some kind that relates to illusion and shape-shifting ability, which we definitely know that Rakshasa in D&D has in spades. In fact, it's shown in the Rakshasa's innate spellcasting abilities, which include things like invisibility, dominate person, true sight, and plane shift, hammering home the magical angle. They're also immune to spells of 6th level or lower, unless they choose to be affected by it. So, I suppose, if you happen to be working for one, or somehow make friends with one, and you wanted to cast a blessing of some kind on it, heal it somehow, what have you, it can probably accept spells of that level or lower, but not if they don't want to. They also have advantage on saving throws against all other types of magic. Now, some kind of magic resistance is pretty common among D&D demons and spirits and things like that, so it's not so surprising, but this is a very powerful threshold just to be immune to spells that aren't 6th level. Yeesh. But one of the most fascinating things about them, in D&D at least, is how they die. Because in Hindu mythology, they didn't necessarily die out, they were banished from the earth by Vishnu, the preserver, basically the god of law and order. In D&D though, Rakshasas never truly die, but if their bodies are killed in the material plane, their spirit is tortured and contorted and torn apart and punished basically in agonizing ways in the 9 hells until they're reborn in a new body, which might take months or years, who knows, but a very, very long time to be experiencing excruciating pain. What's more, when they return, they remember everything of their torment and of their previous life, especially the people who caused that suffering, the people who killed them in the first place. So they'd make an amazing long-term vengeance-seeking villain for your party. But they are tougher than average to hurt. They're immune to damage from mundane sources, which you're unlikely to still have when you're fighting creatures of a challenge rating 13. You're most likely going to have magic weapons by that point. But they actually have vulnerability to piercing damage from magical weapons if they're wielded by creatures of a good alignment. So if your players ever complain that alignments aren't useful in 5th edition, just mention this incredibly specific example. Now, while I've been drawing this, I've been trying to do justice to both the Hindu legend and the D&D creature, but they're both quite different. So I wanted to find a connection between the two of them. My thinking is that Gary Gygax, just as he did with the Gorgon, maybe got confused with a few different legends, reinterpreting them and calling them one creature, the Rakshasa. So exploring a little bit more deeply, I looked into tiger-headed Rakshasas in Hindu mythology, and I couldn't find much, but I could find tiger and lion-headed things. Notably, one story that I came across was, and before I say this name, I feel like I'm going to butcher it, but let me give it a go. The story of Hiranyakashipu, who's an Asura, again we know that's fairly interchangeable with Rakshasas, whose brother was slain by a lion-headed Varaha, one of the avatars of Vishnu. Hiranyakashipu means clothed in gold in Sanskrit, and is supposed to suggest that his life was dedicated to wealth and sins of the flesh, to excess, and so on and so forth, which is a very, very Rakshasa trait in D&D as well, something they both share, is this opulence and excess. And Hiranyakashipu apparently wanted power and control over others, also very Rakshasa trait in D&D. And he did this by gaining mystical powers, and that's just about where the comparisons end. And that's me basically looking at tenuous links to cat people in mythology though. However, they weren't technically even constantly cat people in D&D either. Apparently in AD&D 2, they appeared as humanoids with bodily features of various beasts, much more like the Hindu mythological version. Although I personally don't have a copy of AD&D 2, so I can't totally attest to the accuracy of this. The thing I really want to know about, though, is the backwards hands. Because if you're not an artist, you might not know this, but hands are difficult to draw. And having to think about how to draw them backwards is a pain. So I've been sitting here for a couple of hours drawing something with backwards hands, and I really want to know why I've had to do that. Interesting little artist tidbit as well. If you're ever in a stately home or a museum and looking at portrait paintings, you can always tell how wealthy the person was who commissioned the painting by looking at the hands. Hands are notoriously difficult to paint, and so if the hands are incredibly detailed, you know that the artist was paid a lot of money to do that portrait. However, if the hands are a little bit more basic and all of the details are kept to the face, then you know that the artist wasn't paid quite as much for that, and thus the person who commissioned it might either be a little bit cheap or did not have quite the wealth required to spend on a portrait. Just a little thing to keep in mind when you're next to the museum. But either way, backwards hands. The original illustrator was made by David Trampier, Trampier. Could be Trampier, I suppose. Trampier, who unfortunately passed away in 2014, so I couldn't ask. Now, Hindu mythology sheds some light on the Rakshasas' vulnerability to piercing weapons, although Gary is said to have taken influence when it comes to this from a TV series called Kolchak the Night Stalker, in which a shapeshifter, called a Rakshasa, has a vulnerability to blessed crossbow bolts and piercing weapons. So there's every chance that in this episode of Kolchak the Night Stalker, the Rakshasa had backwards hands, and that's maybe what influenced the drawing as well. But the only thing that I can think of that even has backwards hands in this way is Narlak from Harry Potter. Well, from the Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them movie, but it's in the Harry Potter universe. He's a gangster, a kind of goblin gangster with reversed fingers, played by Ron Perlman. Now, obviously, this can't possibly have influenced the invention of the Rakshasa, which came out in the 70s, but there might be a common theme here. In the script of the film, it describes Narlak as follows. He has, quotes, a cigar in mouth, many of his long fingers bent back on themselves, useless, end quote. A metaphor, I think, for not doing his own dirty work. He's a gangster, he's like the head of the mob or something along those lines. He gets people to do his bidding. Very similar to the behavior of a Rakshasa, who would always rule and subjugate, getting people to do their work for them, maybe avoiding conflict, with this lack of dexterity that comes from having backwards hands, instead preferring magic that they can use from a distance or deception to avoid conflict. But certainly, being the head of a gang and getting people to do your work for you, it could have been a similar thought process in mind when David Trampier was drawing the first Rakshasa in D&D. So there are no answers there, unfortunately. Now, I did tweet Wizards of the Coast about this, and I'll keep you informed if they manage to respond, but as for the moment, this will have to remain a mystery. Anyway, backwards hands or no, this has actually been one of my favourite ones to draw. So thank you for joining me as I explored the mystery of the Rakshasa. If there's a monster you'd like to see me talk about and to draw, make sure to leave a suggestion down in the comments. There have been loads of them already, and I've got plenty to work with. I'm trying to work through them in the order that I was given them, but there's always more room on the to-do list. There's something that you want to see. As well, if you enjoy my videos and you like this one, and you really want to support the channel, maybe help us grow, then please make sure to leave a little like, leave a little thumbs up down below, maybe favorite this video, and share it with someone who you think might also enjoy it. That really, really helps us out. So thank you very much. Until next time, happy monster hunting, and I'll see you later.